Hi, this is Olivia Drott St. James, and today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the 1940s. There were many important events which took place in the 1940s, the most pivotal of which was World War II, which was the war between the Axis powers, Germany, Italy, and Japan, and the Allied powers, France, Britain, the Soviet Union, and the United States. The war began on September 1st, 1939, with the German invasion of Poland, and ended with the surrender of Germany on May 8th, 1945. Likewise, the Japanese capitulated on August 14th, 1945, as a direct result of the atomic bombs dropped by the Americans on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The political leaders of the war included Winston Churchill of Britain, Adolf Hitler of Germany, Benito Mussolini of Italy, Franklin D. Roosevelt of the United States, and Joseph Stalin of the Soviet Union. World War II had many far-reaching and profound effects upon American society, which is why it is most closely associated with the era of the 1940s, and why I'm going to discuss it in detail today. One of the effects of World War II was that it sent women out of the home and into the workplace. As in World War I, women played a vital role in the country's success in World War II. But, as also with World War I, women at the end of World War II found that the advances they had made were greatly reduced when the soldiers returned from fighting abroad. At the end of World War II, those women who had found alternate employment from what was considered to be their normal quote-unquote employment as a housewife lost their jobs. Men took up the jobs they had filled, and women went back to being housewives. African Americans also contributed to the war effort in what would later be known as the Double V campaign, or the Double Victory campaign, which wasn't so much as an event as it was a motivational tool used by African Americans during the time of World War II. It was a double V because the movement had two causes. It called for a victory at war over enemies from without, and victory at home against the enemy of prejudice from within. Although they helped win the war, blacks did not receive the equality they had been hoping for when the war ended. In fact, they returned to an America in which they were treated in the same de facto segregation manner that they had before they left. Reminiscent of the end of Reconstruction, the post-Civil War era, racism, discrimination, and violence against blacks and other minorities increased after World War II. Riots broke out in cities throughout the North, and in the South, returning black soldiers were targeted by the KKK, but blacks began to fight back, and they refused to stand and take the punishment like they used to, which began the beginning of the Civil Rights Movement. That said, it's rather unfortunate but true that one of the themes of the 1940s was a short-lived societal advancement for both women and blacks. However, it did begin their active fight for their rights after World War II. A second theme of the 1940s was racism at home. Beyond what took place towards the African Americans when they returned home from the war, World War II prompted intense racism and prejudice towards Germans and Japanese alike in the United States. While German internment did indeed exist, the oppression of Japanese Americans and Japanese immigrants was more prevalent in the form of Japanese internment camps. The early years of the 40s decade were very much known for the Japanese who were interned in this manner. Another theme of the 40s was the growth of the film industry. While the early 40s were not promising for the American film industry, especially following the late 1941 attack on Pearl Harbor by the Japanese and resultant loss of foreign markets, the Hollywood film production rebounded and reached its profitable peak of efficiency during the years of 1943 to 1946. Advances in film technology like sound recording, lighting, special effects, cinematography, and use of color meant that films were more watchable and quote-unquote modern. Following the end of the war, Hollywood's most profitable year in the decade was 1946, with all-time highs recorded for theater attendance. One of the most famous films of the era, and perhaps even now as well, was Casablanca, and it was the most subtle of all wartime propaganda, and was the romantic story of self-sacrifice and heroism in Michael Curtis's archetypal Ford studio film. It was the story of a disillusioned nightclub owner, played by Humphrey Bogart, and a former lover, Ingrid Bergman, separated by World War II in Paris. The 40s also offered escapist entertainment, reassurance, and patriotic themes, such as William Wyler's wartime film Mrs. Minerva, starring Walter Pidgeon and Oscar-winning courageous heroine Greer Garson as a husband and wife duo. It was a moving tribute and account of courageous war-besieged Britishers who were reliving the trauma of Dunkirk and coping with the war's dangers in a village. The Great Dictator, which was made in 1940, was a wartime, anti-fascist, satirical, thinly veiled lampooning of the Third Reich and its dictatorial leader, in which a Hitler-like despotic tyrant named Adenoid Hinkel, which is very similar to Adolf Hitler, ruled the Kingdom of Timonia. Dozens of films were produced during the 1940s, including Since You Went Away, The Story of G.I. Joe, and many others, the majority of which had a strong political undercurrent, which was either pro-military, anti-fascist, or created a sense of nationalist unity among the American public. To conclude, the 1940s was a time when the fate of democracy was hinged on the backs of the men fighting overseas with the Allied forces of World War II against the tyranny of Hitler and the fascist regime. The war ended when the atomic bomb was dropped on Japan, and a Cold War began with the Soviet Union. When soldiers returned home, it turned out that our economy wasn't the only thing that was excited, as the stork visited houses in record numbers during the baby boom. In the 1940s, Eisenhower expanded the highway system and the suburbs became the place to raise a family. Another key event was the nail-biter election of 1948, where Harry S. Truman defeated Dewey, and the blockade of Berlin in 1948, which was thwarted by the United States airlifts, after which, in the year 1949, NATO was formed to protect the world from Soviet aggression. And some of the themes of this decade, all of which were closely related to World War II, was the advancement, regression, and subsequent inspiration to fight for equal rights among women and blacks, racism within American society, and the growth of the modern film industry, which reflected the culture's concerns. So thank you for listening to my presentation on the 1940s.